The golden lights of the Sapphire Bistro usually promised elegance and refinement. But tonight, they cast long, haunting shadows over a secret that was about to shatter Elias Thorne's world. For 7 days, Elias, a self-made millionaire and the owner of the city's most prestigious restaurant, had watched his most diligent waitress, Aliyah, do something that made his blood run cold. Every single night, as the kitchen staff scrubbed the counters, Aliyah would carefully scrape the half-eaten remains of expensive steaks and pastas into small plastic containers, hiding them at the bottom of her bag with a look of desperation in her eyes. Why would a woman who worked in luxury be scavenging like a thief? Elias thought he knew her character, but as he stepped out of the shadows to follow her into the darkest part of the city, he had no idea that his quest for the truth was about to force him to face a past he had spent 20 years trying to bury. Elias Thorne was a man who measured life in precision and excellence. His journey from a penniless orphan to the owner of a culinary empire was a story often told in business magazines, but the cold hardness of his success left little room for sentiment. The Sapphire Bistro was his crown jewel, a place where the elite came to be seen and where the service was expected to be invisible yet perfect. Among his staff, Aliyah stood out. She was a young black woman with a quiet grace and an incredible work ethic. She never complained about the long hours, and she handled the most difficult customers with a patience that Elias found almost baffling. However, for the last week, Elias had noticed a change in her. Her usual focus seemed fractured by a deep, underlying anxiety, and her eyes were constantly darting toward the clock. It started on a rainy Tuesday. Elias was finishing some paperwork in his glass-walled office that overlooked the kitchen. He saw Aliyah linger behind after her shift had ended. Most of the staff were eager to head home, but she stayed, offering to help the cleaning crew with the dishes. It seemed like a generous gesture until Elias saw her reach for a plate that a wealthy patron had barely touched. A prime ribeye, expensive and succulent, was being slid into a cheap plastic container. Elias felt a surge of irritation. He paid his staff well above the industry standard, and he provided them with fresh, high-quality shift meals. There was no reason for anyone to be taking scraps. He told himself it was a one-time lapse in judgment, perhaps a momentary lapse in pride, but then it happened again on Wednesday and Thursday. By Friday, it had become a ritual. Aliyah would wait until the head chef left, and then she would systematically gather the leftovers that were destined for the bin. She wasn't just taking a snack, she was collecting a feast of remnants. Elias found himself becoming obsessed with the why. Was she selling this food? Was she mocking his establishment by feeding his gourmet creations to stray dogs? The more he watched, the more a cynical part of him took over. He had been burned before by people he trusted, and he had learned that even the most innocent-looking faces could hide a deceptive heart. He decided he wouldn't confront her in the restaurant. He didn't want a scene in front of the other employees, and he wanted to see exactly where that food was going. On Saturday night, the restaurant was packed. The air was thick with the scent of truffle oil and aged wine. Aliyah moved through the crowd like a ghost, efficient and silent. Elias watched her from the shadows of the bar, his arms crossed. He saw her pocket a roll of bread that had fallen onto a clean napkin. He saw her eyes light up on a table of 4 left behind nearly half of their seafood paella. It was calculated. It was intentional. When the clock struck midnight and the last of the lights were dimmed, Elias waited in his charcoal gray SUV across the street. He saw Aliyah emerge from the back entrance, clutching her heavy bag to her chest as if it contained diamonds. She didn't head toward the bus stop like she usually did. Instead, she began walking toward the east side, a part of the city where the streetlights were broken and the prestige of the Sapphire Bistro felt like a distant, cruel dream. Elias started his engine, keeping his headlights off as he began to follow her into the night. The further Aliyah walked, the more the landscape changed. The polished marble and glass of the downtown district gave way to cracked pavements and boarded-up shop fronts. Elias kept a safe distance, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt like a predator, But he told himself he was a protector of his brand. He was a man who hated waste, yet he found himself disgusted by the idea of his food being consumed in such a desolate place. Aliyah didn't look back once. She walked with a purposeful, rhythmic stride, her head down against the biting wind. She eventually turned into a narrow alleyway behind an old, crumbling apartment complex. Elias parked his car at the corner and stepped out, the cold air hitting his face like a slap. He followed her on foot, sticking to the shadows of the brick walls. He watched as she approached a side door that looked like it had been kicked in more than once. She didn't use a key, she knocked a specific rhythm. A moment later, the door creaked open, and she disappeared inside. Elias hesitated. Every instinct told him to turn back, to fire her on Monday, and to forget he ever saw this. But a memory, sharp and jagged, pierced through his mind. He remembered the smell of damp cardboard and the gnawing ache in his own stomach from 30 years ago. He shook the thought away, replaced by a cold professional resolve. He approached the door and pushed it. It wasn't locked. The hallway inside smelled of bleach and poverty, a combination Elias knew all too well. He followed the sound of Aliyah's voice, which led him to a small, dimly lit communal kitchen at the end of the hall.
He peered through the cracked door frame. Inside, Aliyah was not alone. She had spread the containers of cold, half-eaten food across a wooden table that was scarred with burns. Sitting around the table were 3 children, the oldest no more than 10, and an elderly woman who looked frail enough to break in a light breeze. The children weren't talking, they were eating with a feral intensity that made Elias's stomach flip. Aliyah was standing over them, her hand resting gently on the youngest boy's shoulder. She wasn't eating. She was watching them with a look of such profound love and sorrow that Elias felt the air leave his lungs. He realized then that these weren't her children. He knew from her file that she lived alone. These were strangers, or perhaps neighbors. The silence of the room was broken by the elderly woman's voice. She thanked Aliyah, her voice trembling, calling her an angel sent from heaven. Aliyah just shook her head and told them to eat slowly, that there would be more tomorrow. Elias felt a wave of shame wash over him. He had spent a week judging her, thinking she was a thief or a fraud, while she was performing a miracle with his garbage. But then, his professional side kicked back in. This was a health hazard. This was a liability. He was angry that she felt she had to do this, and he was angry that he was seeing it. He stepped into the room, his expensive leather shoes clicking loudly on the linoleum floor. The children froze. The elderly woman gasped, clutching her chest. Aliyah spun around, her face turning a ghostly shade of gray as she recognized her boss standing in the middle of a literal soup kitchen made of scraps. The tension in the room was suffocating. Aliyah's hands began to shake, and she instinctively stepped in front of the children, as if to shield them from Elias's presence. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of terror and a fierce, protective defiance. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the hum of a flickering fluorescent light overhead. Elias looked at the table. At the Wagyu beef bones and the crust of sourdough bread that he usually ordered his staff to throw into the compactor without a second thought. Here, in this cold room, there were the difference between a night of sleep and a night of agonizing hunger. "Mr. Thorne," Aliyah whispered, her voice barely audible. I can explain. Please don't be angry with them. They have nothing to do with this. It was all me." Elias didn't move. He looked past her at the children. They looked terrified, their small faces smeared with the sauce from his restaurant. He felt a surge of conflicting emotions. He wanted to yell about policy and standards, but the words died in his throat. "You've been stealing from me for a week, Aliyah," he said, his voice sounding harsher than he intended. It was a defense mechanism, a way to keep his own rising emotions at bay. Aliyah flinched as if he had struck her. "I know," she said, tears finally spilling over. "I know it's stealing. But the shelter closed down 3 blocks away. These kids, their mother is working 3 jobs and still can't cover the grocery bill. Mrs. Gable here hasn't had a hot meal in days because her stove broke, and she can't afford the parts. I couldn't watch the food go into the bin, Mr. Thorne. I see how much we throw away every night. It's enough to feed this whole floor. I didn't think you'd care. It was trash to the restaurant, but it's life to them. Elias stepped closer, his shadow looming over the table. He picked up one of the containers. It was a plastic tub that once held olives, now filled with a half-eaten portion of risotto. You risked your career for this? Elias asked, looking her directly in the eye. You know the rules. You signed the contract. Taking anything from the premises without permission is grounds for immediate termination. The children started to cry quietly, sensing the danger their benefactor was in. The oldest boy stood up, his small fists clenched. Don't hurt her, he said bravely, though his voice wavered. She's the only one who helps. Elias looked at the boy, and for a split second, he didn't see a stranger. He saw himself. He saw the 7-year-old Elias standing in a similar kitchen, watching his own mother beg for a loaf of bread. The memory hit him like a physical blow, shattering the icy facade he had built over decades. He remembered the shame of being hungry, and the even deeper shame of being seen. He turned away from the table, unable to look at them any longer. Outside. Now, he commanded Aliyah. He walked out of the apartment and into the cold night air, his mind a whirlwind of ghosts and guilt. Aliyah followed him out, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She was waiting for the words that would end her livelihood. She stood on the pavement, the wind whipping her hair around her face, looking at the ground. Elias was leaning against his car, staring up at the dark sky. He didn't speak for a long time. The silence stretched out, heavy and painful. Finally, he turned to her. My mother died when I was 12, he began, his voice low and devoid of its usual authority. Aliyah looked up, surprised by the sudden shift. She worked as a cleaner in a hotel. Every night she would bring home the little soaps and the half-used bottles of shampoo. Sometimes she'd bring back the leftovers from the room service trays. I used to hate it. I hated the smell of other people's food. I hated that we were living off the things they didn't want. He looked at his hands, the hands of a man who now owned everything he ever wanted. I promised myself I would never be that person again. I built the Sapphire Bistro to be a place of perfection because I wanted to distance myself from the messiness of poverty. I thought that by throwing away the leftovers, I was throwing away my past. He looked at the dilapidated building behind them. But tonight, seeing you in there, I realized I haven't moved on at all. I've just become the person who makes sure children like that stay hungry because I'm too proud to look at the waste. Aliyah reached out, her hand hovering near his arm but not quite touching it. Mr. Thorne, I didn't mean to disrespect your business. I just couldn't bear the waste when I knew people were suffering. Elias let out a long, shaky breath. You're fired, Aliyah, he said. The words hit the air like ice. Aliyah's face fell, and she let out a small, broken sob. But before she could turn away, Elias continued. You're fired as a waitress. Starting Monday, you are the director of the Thorne Foundation's new community kitchen. You won't be scavenging scraps anymore. You'll be overseeing a budget that provides fresh, hot meals to this neighborhood and every other neighborhood like it in this city. Aliyah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. I don't understand. Elias stepped toward her, his expression softening into something Aliyah had never seen before, genuine warmth. The Sapphire Bistro produces enough excess to fund a full-scale charity operation if managed correctly. I've been sitting on my wealth like a dragon, Aliyah. You showed me that my success is meaningless if I'm using it to build walls instead of bridges. We aren't going to feed these people leftovers. We are going to feed them the best we have to offer. You'll have a salary, a team, and the full backing of my company. And as for the families in this building, their rent is covered for the next year. Consider it a late payment for the lessons you taught me this week. Aliyah began to weep, but this time, they were tears of overwhelming relief. She tried to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. Elias simply nodded, opened his car door, and drove away, leaving the darkness behind for the first time in his life. Monday morning at the Sapphire Bistro felt different. The air seemed lighter, the staff more energized. Elias arrived earlier than usual, but he didn't head to his office. Instead, he went straight to the kitchen. He gathered the entire staff together, from the executive chef to the dishwashers. He told them about the new initiative. He explained that from now on, the restaurant would not just be a temple of fine dining, but a hub of community support. He announced that a portion of every bill would go directly to the newly formed Aliyah Project, a foundation dedicated to ending food insecurity in the city's most vulnerable districts. The staff cheered, but the most significant change was in Elias himself. The cold, calculated businessman had been replaced by a man with a mission. He spent the afternoon in meetings with contractors, planning the renovation of an old warehouse he owned. It would become a state-of-the-art community center, with a kitchen that rivaled his own restaurant. Aliyah was there beside him, her eyes bright with excitement and a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, she was a leader. She guided him through the needs of the community, showing him where the help was needed most. She taught him that true luxury isn't about what you can afford to buy, but what you can afford to give away. As the weeks turned into months, the Aliyah project grew beyond Elias's wildest dreams. Other restaurateurs in the city heard about the initiative and began to join in. The Thorne effect became a movement. Elias found himself visiting the apartment complex where he had followed Aliyah that fateful night. He sat at the same scarred wooden table, but this time, it was covered in fresh fruit, roasted vegetables, and warm bread baked that morning. He sat with the children and the elderly woman, listening to their stories. He realized that for years, he had been hungry for something money couldn't buy, a sense of belonging and a peace with his own history. The story of the millionaire and the waitress became a legend in the city, but for Elias and Aliyah, it was simply the beginning of a new chapter. They had turned a secret born of desperation into a legacy of hope. Elias finally understood that his mother's scraps weren't a sign of her failure, but a testament to her love and her will to survive. By embracing that truth, he had finally set himself free. The Sapphire Bistro continued to thrive, but its greatest achievement wasn't the Michelin stars it earned. It was the thousands of lives it touched outside its doors. In life, we often find ourselves judging others based on the shadows they walk in, never realizing those shadows are cast by the very light we refuse to share. Elias Thorne thought he was protecting his empire, but he was actually a prisoner of his own pride until one woman's act of quiet rebellion showed him the way out. This story serves as a powerful reminder that there is no such thing as waste when it comes to human kindness. Sometimes, the things we throw away are exactly what someone else needs to survive, and the people we look down upon are the ones who can teach us how to truly stand tall. Never be afraid to look closer, to follow the truth, and to turn your success into a shield for those who have nothing.